Some of the £5.3 billion worth of missing or at least untraceable equipment is here, Donington in Shropshire. It's Europe's largest military store. Although as you peer through the mesh fence and the tall trees from the visitors' car park, there's little evidence of its crucial military importance. All you can see are a few low-slung warehouses. The question is, if you want something from inside one of them, well, how do you get it? Because of the inadequate systems for tracking equipment, sometimes the only way to find the part or the spare that you want is to take matters into your own hands.
The only way to make sure you know what's there is to go and actually have a look at it.
Former Army repair worker David Trevanian recalls how he was looking for spare tank engines. Such was the disarray in the stores, he couldn't find the right one in the system, but heard on the grapevine that the spares he needed had been spotted at Donington.
Storekeepers being storekeepers aren't engineers. They don't appreciate the build spec of an engine or the particular type. It's not recorded.
So how did you track down the tank engines that you wanted?
Oh, well, we knew where they were, sitting in the stores in Donington, but it was a question of lifting the lid and seeing what was there.
So you physically had to go and inspect the stores at Donington to find out whether or not you had the right kind of engines that you needed?
Yeah, we did. Because of the state of the records at the time, it was the safest thing to do. Saved time and effort.
He found his engines and went away a happy man. That was 5 years ago. But if you listen to the National Audit Office, it doesn't sound much like things have changed either at Donington or the MoD's other stores.
The favourite analogy is the closing scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, just this enormous Aladdin's cave of stuff in some cases.
Ross Campbell investigated the MoD stores earlier this year for the National Audit Office.
These are very big warehouses, both in the UK and Germany, and Defence has a bit of a habit of hanging on to stuff, just in case. So you can imagine there are all sorts of things tucked away in various corners of the Defence estate.
What kind of things have you seen?
We have seen everything from large marine diesel engines, literally through to Singer sewing machines, the old sort of treadle-operated sewing machines.
You're telling me that there are army stores which currently have within them old-fashioned Singer sewing machines?
Yes, Defence is very guilty of never throwing anything away that might come in useful.
One insider told us about a fully automated warehouse at Donington, which has almost 300,000 spare parts and other items of equipment. Unfortunately, it relies on a computer system from the 1980s. The worker didn't want to be identified, so we voiced his words.
The problem is we have crane failures daily. They're old, and we lose a whole spur for 2 hours, which means you can't get anything out. Then there's also the fragility of the computer that controls that warehouse. That's also a problem. They fail regularly, and it's that computer that's responsible for getting the stock out of the building. And if the computer fails, you have to send another crane down a different spur of the warehouse to find what you need. So any one of these problems can have a knock-on effect. It delays the supplies getting out. These are the problems we suffer every day, and we've had them for the past 15 years.
As well as having to contend with creaking infrastructure and computer systems that don't join up, staff at military stores have also had to deal with job cuts. The PCS union claims around 2,500 staff have been made redundant from military stores in the last 5 years, around a third of the total workforce. More are bound to follow. Yet the National Audit Office complained that last November the supply chain was 101 posts below strength. In some cases the gaps have been filled by agency staff, but our insider says these workers often lack the skills and experience to deal with such a complicated infrastructure.
They're more likely to make mistakes because they don't know the system. For example, there are location signs that are painted on the floor of the warehouses to show people where things are. You have to understand some of the buildings are 6 acres across and full of engines, and one engine looks like any other. But if the agency worker reads the signs wrong and picks up the wrong engine, then he's wasted everyone's time. There should be a huge amount of training for anyone on this system, but generally it doesn't happen with the agency workers.
And all of this piles pressure onto a supply chain which is responsible for getting vital equipment to members of the armed forces serving in Libya and Afghanistan. No wonder it's buckling under the weight. The National Audit Office report in March observed,
The Defence Logistics Board concluded that the probability of one of the base inventory warehousing and management systems suffering a catastrophic failure had risen to a critical level. Such failures, if sustained for more than 30 days, could have a serious impact on the ability to maintain operations in Afghanistan and elsewhere.
In other words, the MoD's own logistics experts are warning of a serious risk to the system of supply lines to troops on active service. Ross Campbell from the NAO again.
Some of the base inventory management systems are nearly 30 years old. Now, these systems are no longer necessarily supported by the original suppliers, assuming the original suppliers are even still around. That means there aren't upgrades, and also these systems were designed in an era when computing wasn't so flexible and people didn't necessarily understand or build in the need for flexibility into the systems. This all brings together and sort of builds in a risk of failure that gives rise to a fairly significant operating risk.
How great is that risk of failure?
Certainly, it was severe enough for the last Chief of Defence Logistics to raise at board level within the department. I mean, certainly, this could have a significant impact. You know, what will Defence do in the event that one of these systems failed? Well, one thing our forces are very good at is making do and overcoming difficult circumstances. And I'm sure what they'll do is they'll throw resources at it, and they'll make it work just by sheer willpower, if nothing else alone. But it'll require a significant diversion of resources away from other tasks.
Ultimately, there's a conviction, or is it a hope, that despite the inadequate systems and staff shortages, frontline troops won't be left exposed. And at the moment, there are no reports of vital equipment failing to get through. That hasn't always been the case. In the early stages of the Iraq War in 2003 and 2004, and again more recently in Afghanistan, soldiers died because they didn't always receive the life-saving equipment they needed when they needed it. Because of that, senior officers can now bypass the rickety supply chain by requesting the dispatch of vital items direct from the factory gate to the front line. Nevertheless, last year, almost half of the Army's total supplies to Afghanistan arrived late, and even 2/3 of equipment classed as being of immediate need and given the highest priority missed its 5-day delivery target. The Army has learned that the quickest solution to overcoming these delays is to airlift in equipment. But as Ross Campbell of the NAO observes, that's not only hugely expensive, the system is open to misuse.
Troops on the ground can't always tell where something is, either in the warehouse or in logistic stores, actually even in theatre. And that does tend to lead to a culture of both over-ordering material but also accelerating the priority for equipment, which gives rise to increased transport costs. And I think they admit themselves that they're probably sending too much by air.
How much do they send by air and how expensive is that compared to transporting it by surface?
The weight of stuff they send out, roughly 30% goes by air and 70% goes by surface.
Isn't that hugely expensive?
It is.
And is it always necessary?
I think it's very difficult to say that it's always necessary, largely because some of the stuff being sent out is not necessarily always critical military supplies. And our guys, when they did this review, saw things like steel filing cabinets being sent by air, which I think is difficult to argue there's a critical military need for those.
I'm now outside the MoD storage base in Bicester, which is at the heart of a recent scandal that highlights the absurdity of the system. A soldier urgently requested a pair of boots as he was off to serve in Afghanistan. They were couriered to his barracks in Northern Ireland at a cost of £714. What the system didn't compute was that the following day the soldier was flying out from Bryce Norton, just 23 miles away. MP Elvin Clwyd, who discovered the story, thinks this is the symptom of a broken system.
Well, I've been told that it's an absolute farce at the moment, that couriers are being engaged to carry small packages up and down Britain and over onto Ireland. And these are at, cost of several hundred a go, when actually in-house drivers are standing still doing nothing. There have been examples of a courier being dispatched and not knowing the way to an army base and having to follow an army truck to find wherever he's going, and typically with one small package on the back seat. So there's something drastic going on, I think, something really wrong.
The MoD said that while they are committed to making the department more efficient, if a unit needs an item urgently, they will use couriers. Of course, not every piece of kit is likely to be needed urgently, and in an effort to reduce storage costs and streamline the supply chain, the MoD has created what it calls deep and dark warehouses. There's one in Germany, to store some of the equipment it owns but can't find an immediate use for. That will only work, though, if thorough details are kept of potentially useful items which can then be retrieved when needed. Andy Gilbertson from the PCS Union.
What that deep and dark has actually meant is it's been so deep and dark that people have forgotten what's in that warehouse, and also they actually don't really know what that item is, even when they get to go and look at it, because it might not be given a proper NATO stock number to be recognised immediately. So somebody has ultimately got to go and do the research to find out what it is.
But now the MoD is making one more attempt to bring its unwieldy and wasteful system of equipment and supplies under control. Last December, they appointed Boeing UK to manage an 11-year contract worth £803 million to bring together under one roof 270 disparate computer systems. It's called the Future Logistics Information Service, or FLIS. But only last week, Defence Secretary Liam Fox announced that the Standing Army will be cut by 19,000 troops to help tackle a £38 billion black hole in the MoD's spending plans. Against this background of cost-cutting, Francis Tusa sounds a cautious note.
Most of the information technology there is between 30 and 40 years old. It has been crying out for investment for, well, probably 20 years. Think of a Tesco's and M&S and Amazon. How many of those businesses would be able to run as they do today if they were operating off information technology that was 30 years old?
So we asked the MoD whether FLIS would definitely go ahead. They declined our request for an interview, but said it would, and commented, "We must have better systems in place to accurately track what resources are held and where." Yet only last week the MoD found an additional £5 billion black hole in its spending plans, taking the overall projected deficit to £43 billion. We've been here before, and history shows that programmes to upgrade the storage and distribution of military supplies are often the first casualty of cost-cutting.